Stop, don't move. Have a receipt for these items?
I literally just purchased them, officer, right here.
I need to see a receipt. You fit the description of someone who left this store without paying.
I am a federal judge. My identification is in my purse. I purchased these groceries. You can't accuse me like that in front of my kids.
You are under arrest. Hands where I can see.
And her kids, Caleb and Jade, were right there watching as their mum was arrested. They had walked in with her, stayed close the way kids do in a crowded store, and now they were standing in the middle of a Whole Foods parking lot, watching a police officer step in front of their mother. Before this was over, there would be a termination letter, a criminal indictment, and a third party connected to this case, someone whose name you are going to recognize, whose role in all of it will not be revealed until the end of this video. And when it is going to recontextualize everything you just heard. This is not a story about one cop with a smirk and a bad record. This is about a system that protected him for 9 years, 19 women whose complaints were buried, and one woman who refused to disappear. Every person who knows this story and says nothing becomes part of the problem. Subscribe, share this video, because silence is exactly what kept Dwayne Jack on the street for 9 years. Drop your answer in the comments, because this story is about to show you exactly what was. To understand why what happened in that parking lot mattered as much as it did, it helps to understand exactly who Dr. Sandra Finch was before Dwayne Jack ever stepped out of that cruiser. Sandra Finch did not stumble into the federal judiciary. She built her way there, brick by brick, over decades of work that most people will never fully appreciate. Harvard Law School, 16 years on the federal bench, a track record of landmark civil rights rulings that had reshaped legal precedent in ways that still echo through courtrooms across the country today. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle respected her, not because she was easy, but because she was precise, principled, and uncompromising when the law demanded it. But here is what the headlines about her credentials often miss. Sandra Finch did not define herself by her titles. She defined herself by what those titles allowed her to do: fight for equal justice from the inside, in a system that had not always made space for people who looked like her. She understood, better than most, what it meant when the law failed ordinary people. She had spent 16 years making sure it failed them less often. She was also simply a mother. 2 kids. Caleb, 14 years old, quiet and observant in the way that teenage boys often are when they are paying more attention than they let on. And Jade, 7, who according to everyone who knew her, had inherited every ounce of her mother's intensity and then some. On the day everything changed, Dr. Finch had just come off one of the hardest sessions she had faced in recent memory. A wrongful conviction case that had taken 3 full years to reach her courtroom. 3 years of procedural delays, appeals, and legal maneuvering while an innocent person sat in a cell. That morning, she had finally delivered the ruling. It was the right outcome. But right outcomes in cases like that do not feel like victories. They feel like relief mixed with grief. Relief that justice finally arrived, and grief that it took so long. She left the courthouse emotionally hollowed out. She called Caleb and Jade on the way to the car, told them she was stopping to pick up dinner ingredients, told them it would be a quiet night at home. No work talk, just food and family and rest. Whole Foods. On the way home was not a decision she had to think about. She had been shopping at that location for years. She knew the layout without looking. She knew which aisles to avoid on weekday evenings. She knew the staff by name. Destiny at Register 4, who had been there almost as long as Dr. Finch had been a regular, and who greeted her the way you greet someone you are genuinely glad to see. That evening, Destiny rang her up as usual. $312.47. Organic produce, pantry staples, a few things the kids had asked for. Dr. Finch packed everything into her reusable bags herself, the way she always did. Destiny printed the receipt and tucked it into the top of the first bag. Dr. Finch thanked her, picked up her bags, and walked toward the exit. On the way to her car, she noticed a police cruiser idling near the entrance to the parking lot. She registered it the way most people register a parked car, briefly, without concern. She had no reason to think twice about it. She had just paid $312.47 for groceries, with a receipt sitting right at the top of her bag. She was a federal judge walking to her own vehicle in a parking lot she had walked through dozens of times before. She walked past that cruiser without a second thought. She had no idea that the man sitting inside it had already made a decision about her, not based on anything she had done, not based on anything she said, based on nothing more than what he saw when he looked at her. That decision would cost him everything. Because the moment Dr. Sandra Finch set her bags down to load her trunk, Officer Dwayne Jack stepped out of his cruiser and started walking toward her. And what happened in the next 4 minutes and 20 seconds would be recorded on 9 separate phones, watched by 52 million people, and ultimately argued before a federal jury that would make history. Jack did not introduce himself with a reason. He walked up and asked her where she got the items in her bags. Just like that. No preamble, no explanation. As if the question itself was supposed to make sense without one. Dr. Finch was confused. She told him she had just purchased them inside the store. He asked for a receipt. She reached toward her bag to retrieve it. The receipt Destiny had placed right at the top, in plain sight. Jack told her to stop reaching. She froze. He accused her of shoplifting. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, calmly, "And people who know Sandra Finch will tell you that her calm under pressure is not passivity, it is precision." She told him she was a federal judge. She reached slowly, deliberately, into her coat pocket and produced her federal judicial credentials. She held them out toward him. Dwayne Jack looked at them, and then he smirked. He told her she could tell it to the store manager. 2 spots away, a 58-year-old woman named Phoebe Thomas had been watching the entire exchange from her own car. Phoebe was white, retired, and by her own account, not someone who involved herself in other people's business as a general rule. But what she was watching did not sit right with her. She called out clearly that she had seen Dr. Finch exit the store with bags and a receipt. She had watched the whole thing. She said it loudly enough that there was no question Jack had heard her. He did not acknowledge Phoebe Thomas. He did not look in her direction. He turned back to Dr. Finch and told her that credentials did not prove she had paid for the groceries. Then he reached into one of her bags and started pulling items out, placing them on the ground. Organic produce, on the asphalt of a parking lot, ostensibly searching for proof of theft in a bag that already had a receipt sitting inside it. From the car, the back door opened. Caleb stepped out. 14 years old, watching a police officer empty his mother's grocery bags onto the ground while she stood with her credentials in her outstretched hand. Dr. Finch turned to him. Her voice, which had been steady through all of it, broke slightly for the first time. She told him to get back in the car. He did. But he did not look away. Jack moved to handcuff her. And that is when 7-year-old Jade, watching from the back seat of her mother's car, started screaming. Dr. Sandra Finch, Harvard Law graduate, 16-year federal judge, a woman who had spent her entire career making sure the law treated people with dignity, stood in a Whole Foods parking lot with her hands behind her back, her groceries on the ground, her receipt in the bag, her credentials ignored, and her daughter screaming her name. She did not resist. She did not raise her voice. She stood still and she waited. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. That is how long the handcuffs stayed on. 4 minutes and 20 seconds before another officer pulled into that parking lot and everything Dwayne Jack had set in motion began to unravel in real time. Officer Dustin Hedge arrived, stepped out of his vehicle, and within moments of approaching the scene, spotted something that Jack had apparently missed, or chosen to ignore. The receipt. Still sitting inside the bag Jack had already reached into and searched. Right there, in plain view. Hedge found it. He found the judicial credentials. He looked at Jack and told him to remove the handcuffs. Jack complied. But as he did, With 3 cameras still rolling and 9 phones still recording, he muttered something. Loud enough to be captured clearly on multiple devices. He said she should have just cooperated from the beginning. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of error, a justification. As if the problem was her response to being accused of a crime she did not commit, rather than the accusation itself. Dustin Hedge filed an internal incident report that same night. He flagged Jack's conduct in writing before he went home. That report would matter later. But on that Tuesday evening, Dr. Sandra Finch drove home, got her children inside, put them to bed, and sat alone in her kitchen in the quiet. She did not sleep. The next morning, a bystander named Trevon Hall posted his footage online. By the time Dr. Finch's alarm would have gone off, it already had 400,000 views. By Wednesday, it had 12 million. By the end of the week, 52 million people had watched Officer Dwayne Jack handcuff a federal judge in a parking lot while her receipt sat untouched in her grocery bag and a witness called out on her behalf. Her office phone did not stop ringing. Journalists, civil rights organizations, attorneys from across the country. She did not issue a public statement. She did not post on social media. She made one phone call to a civil rights litigator named Nick Saxe, who had built his entire career taking on exactly the kind of cases that everyone else found too complicated or too costly to fight. Nick Saxe pulled Dwayne Jack's record. What he found was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention. It was, however, a devastation to anyone who still believed the system was catching its own failures. 11 racial profiling complaints, 9 years on the force, every single complaint dismissed internally. Not one resulted in disciplinary action. Not one triggered mandatory retraining. And in the middle of those 9 years, with those complaints sitting in a file somewhere in a department office, Dwayne Jack had been promoted. Twice. This man had been doing this for 9 years. And the department knew. The question was never whether Dwayne Jack had a pattern. The evidence made that impossible to dispute. And the question, the one that Nick Saxe was already beginning to build toward, was who had been looking at that pattern for 9 years and deciding over and over again that it did not require a response, because that answer was coming, and it was going to change the entire shape of this story. Within 10 days of the video reaching 52 million views, 19 black women came forward. Not 2, not 5, 19. Monica Garrett was a nurse. I stopped by Dwayne Jack in that same Whole Foods parking lot in 2021, scrubs on, receipt in hand. Accused of theft anyway. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. Josephine Michel was a college professor. Stopped outside a Target in 2022. She had her receipt, her faculty ID, and a bank notification confirming her transaction before Jack finished his first sentence. He told her none of it confirmed she had paid. Same smirk, same dismissal. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. Brianna Simmons was pregnant. In 2023, Jack handcuffed her in a parking lot while her 2-year-old toddler stood on the pavement beside her. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. 19 women, 19 incidents. Every single one in a predominantly black neighborhood or integrated shopping area. Every single one involving a black woman shopping alone or with children. Every single one ending with no charges, because not one of these women had done anything wrong. Nick Saxe laid every incident on a timeline, and the pattern announced itself without interpretation. Same approach, same tactics, same smirk, described independently by witnesses across multiple years. Same outcome every single time. But when Nick dug deeper into the complaint history, the story shifted from one officer's conduct into something far more calculated. 3 of Jack's complaints had not just been reviewed and dismissed. They had been actively buried by a supervising sergeant named Katu Banks. Banks had seen those complaints sitting in the system. He had closed them at the supervisory level before they could be escalated, labeling the women's accounts as unsubstantiated. Then he co-signed Jack's last 2 performance reviews, both with commendations, after the complaints were already on file. This was not a rogue cop slipping through the cracks. This was a system that looked at 9 years of complaints and made a deliberate choice to protect him. And at the center of that system was someone whose name had not yet surfaced, someone whose full role in what had been happening was still coming. Someone you were going to recognize. That name was coming. But first, Nick Saxe had a case to build. If you have not subscribed yet, now is the time, because what happens next is where 19 women and 1 federal judge take on an entire department, and the way they did it is worth every second. Nick filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, while the Department of Justice simultaneously opened its own pattern and practice investigation into the department's complaint dismissal history. This was no longer just about one parking lot incident. The entire institution was now under federal scrutiny, and the 19 women joined as co-complainants. It was not an easy decision for all of them. Brianna Simmons nearly withdrew. She was terrified of retaliation, and she had a young child to protect. Dr. Finch called her personally. That conversation lasted 2 hours. Brianna Simmons stayed. The department's legal team offered Dr. Finch $400,000 to settle, sign an NDA, and never speak publicly again. She declined without deliberation. They came back with $750,000. She declined again. Then they were not offering justice. They were offering silence. And Dr. Sandra Finch was not for sale. While Nick built the legal strategy, Dr. Finch's law clerk was producing one of the most important documents in the case. Her name was Destiny, the same young woman who had been behind Register 4 at that Whole Foods, who had rung up $312.47 that evening and tucked the receipt into the top of the bag. She had left that job, enrolled in law school, and was now clerking for the judge whose groceries she had once bagged. Destiny drafted a memo documenting every procedural violation Jack committed in those 4 minutes and 20 seconds. 14 violations, time-stamped, cross-referenced against department policy. 14 separate moments where Jack's conduct broke his own department's rules. They thought money would make Dr. Finch disappear. They had no idea what was coming. Then Natalia Batten came forward. Natalia was one of the 19 women and a retired law enforcement officer. After her own encounter with Jack in 2022, she had started wearing a personal body camera whenever she ran errands. She had it running that day. The footage was clear. The audio was clean. And on that recording, Dwayne Jack used a racial slur. Not implied, not ambiguous, clearly, twice. Nick Saxe watched that footage and understood immediately what it meant. This was not just a pattern of errors, and this was documented contempt. What happened when that footage was played in court is something that cannot be fully described. But at the 22-minute mark, you are going to hear exactly what Nick played for that jury, and you are going to understand why Jack's attorney reacted the way he did. The case was assigned to Judge Patricia Ann Holloway, 71 years old, 4 decades on the bench, and a civil rights record that needed no introduction. The trial lasted 9 days. Every one of the 19 women testified. Phoebe Thomas testified. Dustin Hedge, the officer who had removed the handcuffs, was never subpoenaed. He contacted the legal team himself and asked to appear voluntarily. He walked into that courtroom because he chose to. Jack's defense argued his conduct was routine and that Dr. Finch had escalated the situation. That was their argument, that a woman who stood still, produced her credentials, and then watched her groceries get emptied onto the ground had been the problem. Then Nick Saxe played Natalia Batten's footage. The courtroom went silent. 2 jurors visibly reacted. Jack's attorney requested a recess. Judge Holloway denied it. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned a verdict of $12 million, the largest civil rights settlement in Atlanta's history. Compensatory damages for Dr. Finch. Punitive damages for the 19 women whose complaints had been buried for nearly a decade. The courtroom erupted. Dwayne Jack sat completely still. 19 women filed complaints against the same officer over 9 years, and every single one was dismissed. What do you think it would have taken for the system to act if Dr. Finch had never been in that parking lot? And drop your answer in the comments, because the next part of this story is about to show you exactly who made sure those complaints never went anywhere. Dwayne Jack was terminated within 48 hours of the verdict. Not suspended, not reassigned, terminated. And it did not stop there. The Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council revoked his law enforcement certification, meaning he could not serve as a police officer anywhere in the state of Georgia. Ever again. The badge was gone. The authority was gone. All of it. Finished. Then came the criminal charges. Official misconduct. Civil rights violation under color of law. Filing a false incident report. Jack posted bail and was placed under supervised release. The man who had smirked at a federal judge's credentials in a parking lot was now the one with a case file bearing his name. Katu Banks did not wait to be fired. He resigned. But the resignation did not save him from what came next. Under misconduct provisions, he forfeited his pension, $190,000 gone. And when the DOJ pattern and practice report was released, Banks's name appeared in it 17 times, not mentioned in passing, cited. 17 separate references to decisions he made, documents he handled, and complaints he ensured never went anywhere. The Atlanta Police Department's chief issued a public statement. Dr. Sandra Finch was shown a copy. She read one line from it on camera and said nothing else about it. Nothing else needed to be said. The department overhauled its entire complaint review process. External civilian oversight was mandated for all racial profiling allegations going forward. Every officer in the department went through de-escalation retraining. 3 additional officers named in the DOJ report were placed on administrative leave pending further review. The institution that had protected Dwayne Jack for 9 years was now being rebuilt from the inside out under federal pressure. The financial cost of choosing to protect one officer over nearly a decade was now visible in full. $12 million verdict, $2.3 million in city legal fees, $800,000 in departmental reform costs, Katu Banks's forfeited pension of $190,000. Total institutional cost, over $15 million. $15 million that could have been avoided at any point in 9 years if one complaint against Dwayne Jack had been taken seriously. And now for where everyone landed. Jack was awaiting criminal trial, his certification revoked, his career finished. Katu Banks was in negotiated civil settlement, his pension gone, his name in a federal report 17 times. The 19 women were receiving their portions of the punitive damages award. Money that could not return the years they had spent carrying what happened to them in silence, but that represented something the system had never once offered them before. Acknowledgement. To Brianna Simmons, the woman who had almost walked away from the case, who had been handcuffed while pregnant with her toddler on the pavement beside her, was now a vocal civil rights advocate. She had turned the worst moment of her life into a platform, and she was using it. Natalia Batten's footage, the personal body camera recording that had captured Jack using a racial slur twice, clearly on audio, was now being used in law enforcement training programs in 3 states. The evidence she had the foresight to collect after her own encounter was actively reshaping how officers in multiple jurisdictions were being trained. And Destiny, the young woman who had been behind Register 4 at Whole Foods on the evening of the arrest, who had rung up $312.47 and tucked a receipt into the top of a grocery bag, was now in her 2nd year of law school on a scholarship established in the aftermath of the case by a civil rights foundation. The cashier who had become a law clerk, who had documented 14 procedural violations in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, was on her way to becoming an attorney. That is where everyone stood, and it would have been enough. It would have been a complete story. 19 women, 1 verdict, One department overhauled, 2 careers ended, $15 million in institutional consequences. But then Dr. Sandra Finch received a letter, 3 weeks after the verdict. Not official correspondence, was a personal letter. It came from the attorney who had offered her $400,000 to settle. The same attorney who had come back with $750,000. He was not writing on behalf of the department. He was writing on his own behalf because there was something he needed her to know. Something that had been sealed during trial proceedings to protect the integrity of the verdict, and that she deserved to understand now that the case was closed. Before the trial began, Katu Banks had approached him privately. Banks had offered him information intended to discredit Dr. Finch, fabricated prior complaints, drafted by Banks himself, backdated into the department's system to make it appear that Dr. Finch had a history of making false or exaggerated accusations. Banks had constructed a false record against a sitting federal judge and attempted to introduce it into her civil rights case through opposing counsel. The attorney had refused. He had reported the approach to the court. The disclosure had been sealed to protect the trial. And now, with the verdict delivered and the case closed, he had written to Dr. Finch directly so that she would know what had been attempted. Katu Banks, the man who had spent 9 years burying complaints against Dwayne Jack, who had co-signed commendations for an officer he knew had a pattern of racial profiling, who had labeled 19 women's accounts as unsubstantiated, had spent his final days in uniform trying to manufacture a false record against the woman who had exposed him. And he had done it in writing. The evidence of that attempt was now part of a separate criminal investigation. That was the craziest part. Not the $12 million, not the 19 women, not even the footage. The fact that the man responsible for a 9-year cover-up, facing the full weight of a federal verdict, looked at everything collapsing around him and decided his best remaining move was to fabricate documents against a federal judge. That was what Dr. Finch had meant at the very beginning of this story when she said the verdict was not even the craziest part. Now the loop was closed. But none of this came without cost. That part of the story deserves to be told plainly. Dr. Finch spent weeks away from the bench. Both of her children went to therapy. Jade, who had been 7 years old in that back seat, needed time and professional support to process what she had watched happen to her mother. Caleb, 14, quiet, observant, stopped speaking much for nearly 2 months after the incident. Not dramatically. Just gone inward in the way that children go when something has shaken their understanding of how the world is supposed to work and they do not yet have the language for what they are feeling. Dr. Finch had not asked to become a symbol. She had gone to buy groceries for a quiet evening at home with her kids after a hard day in court. The weight of what the case became, the media attention, the public narrative, the responsibility of representing something larger than herself while simultaneously trying to protect her children, was real, and it was heavy, and it did not disappear when the verdict came in. When asked whether she would do it again, her answer was immediate. She said they put handcuffs on the wrong woman. Not because she was a judge, but because no woman, no person, should have been put in handcuffs that day. The title did not save her. The truth did. For anyone watching this who has experienced something similar, document everything. Dates, times, witnesses, names. Know your rights. Find legal counsel even if it is just a consultation. Do not fight alone, because 19 women together accomplished what 19 women alone could not. The resources to help you start are in the description below. And one last thing. There is one person in this story who has not been mentioned by name. Someone who sat in the gallery of that federal courtroom every single day of the 9-day trial and never said a word publicly. Not before the verdict, not after, not once. When the time comes to tell that part of the story, this channel will be the first place it gets told. If you are not subscribed, do it now. Turn on notifications. Because that story is coming, and based on everything you have just watched, you already know it is not going to be simple.